From Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of the book of Ruth. Boaz, the hero? If we look at this book of Ruth, it's a book all about kindness. And in this book, it seems that Boaz plays one of the chief roles of a kind person who marries this woman who has nothing else, this Ruth who comes from a far-off land, who comes from a questionable background. But he marries her because Ruth, too, is a person of great kindness. She showed kindness to her mother-in-law. But if we look at one particular verse in the story, it turns out that it's questionable whether Boaz was indeed the great hero that one might think. It says, Unamin modali isha. To Naomi, there was a man who was known to her husband who had died. There was a man who was known to him, perhaps related to him. Ish gibor chayil, a man of great possessions. Mishpachat Elimelech, from the family of Elimelech. Ushmo Boaz, his name was Boaz. And we say, well, if Naomi and Ruth had such a wonderful relative, and he was a man of means, and he had all these fields and workers, well, then why didn't he take them in when they came? So Shlomo Alkabetz, the great author of the Lachadodi from Tzvat, is quoted by the Geresh Shmuel. Geresh Shmuel is a collection of commentaries on the book of Ruth, written by Shmuel de Ozida, who was a Sephardic rabbi from the days of the Ari in Tzvat. And he says, let's examine this whole question of the righteousness of Boaz. He says, firstly, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz says that maybe we can see the great righteousness of Ruth and Naomi. After all, they could have gone to their rich cousin and they could have had him bail them out, but they didn't want to throw themselves on the community. So they treated themselves like paupers, and they went with all the other people to glean behind the poor people, to glean behind the reapers, and to achieve what they could through charity, but not explicitly going to beg or even to going to ask for a favor from their cousin. That's the view of Shlomo Alkabetz. But then the Reb Shmuel Zida, he says, wait a second. There is a great safek, that there's a great doubt over here. What is this? He says, after all, if he's such a great righteous man, this Boaz, how could he leave these women, almanot, umlalot? They are widows. They are so impoverished that they actually have to go and walk through the fields. They have very little clothing. They probably have bad shoes and they have to walk around following the reapers. How could this be? Why didn't he come to greet them with great gifts when they first came to town? What's going on? So he says, in fact, it may be that in fact, actually, he's not righteous at all, in the sense that actually he sinned a great sin. Boaz gadol varav. He had a terrible sin. He could actually say that the reason that the text does not say moda, someone who is known to her husband, someone who's related to her husband, but it says meida, it says without the vav, because actually the text is trying to tell you that he treated himself like a stranger. He didn't take his relatives in when they came. He didn't act like a real relative. However, he says that the Reb Shemaria HaIkarti, another Sephardic rabbi, he says, no, surely he must have gone to greet them. He was known, he was a relative. I'm sure he did come to visit. The question is, how does he know that? Who says that Boaz did any kindness? Rabbi Yitzchak Arama he says, I also have a problem. I don't understand. This great Sephardic exile from Spain, he says, how could it be? He says, well, tell you what, maybe he was trying to check her out. After all, now Ruth is a convert. Is she sincere? Isn't she sincere? He'd like to marry her. He'd like to take care of the family, but is she sincere or not? To this, Reb Shmuel says, wait a second, I mean, they're impoverished. They're your relatives. You got to take care of them. You can't wait to determine if you want to marry them. You don't want to. You have to take care of them now. So then he says as follows. He says that we have to understand the true situation here. The Rabbi Shmuel Zida says, I'll tell you what the real situation is. We have to understand that the day that Naomi came to town, her husband, his wife, Boaz's wife, had passed away. So now he's mourning. You expect him in mourning to go out and greet his cousin? Furthermore, there are two relatives. There's his cousin, Naomi. So he says, if it was just for Naomi, maybe at some point after his mourning was over, he would go and propose to Naomi. But there's also this young girl. And would it seem right? He's an older man. She's a younger girl. And would it seem proper? All of a sudden he starts courting them. He starts sending them gifts and starts inviting them in his house. And there's this younger woman here. What type of person is she? So he says that the issue was that he was concerned that it would seem improper that he was perhaps making overtures to this younger woman. So he had to sort of hide his intentions. And when Ruth says to him, why are you giving us such special treatment? You insist that we come to your field. He can't answer that he was afraid to be more forthcoming because it may seem strange. So he says, oh, I heard that you were very kind. But the truth is that the real reason that he didn't want to take action, to take a more forceful action was, number one, he was in mourning. And number two, he didn't want it to seem that he was somehow overly interested in this young woman until she showed that she would welcome this overture. And Naomi bowed to her daughter-in-law, let him marry her instead of me, and this tremendous gesture of kindness. So indeed, the Rabbi Shmuel Zida, he bails out Boaz, but there are a number of commentators, and the Ger Shmuel himself is wondering, how righteous is this Boaz? What exactly is his position? I would suggest that in fact the text suggests a great passivity on the part of Boaz. He doesn't seem to take any action. We have to ask ourselves, are we more like Boaz in the good version or the bad version? Or are there people that moda lanu? They're people we know. Oh yeah. You see them, oh, you slap them in the back, you're good friends. You tell people, oh, yeah, he's a good friend of mine. But then when they come into trouble, the vav disappears, they really know you. Well, I don't really know them that well. I mean, it's just, I knew them once in school or something. Someone dies in their family, well, I don't really have to pick up the phone to call them. I don't really know them too well. Are we like Boaz in the good version or the bad version? Or do we take an interest in those who perhaps lost a job, perhaps lost a spouse, perhaps lost a relative, perhaps just a little bit depressed, a little down about various minor aspects of their lives? Someone maybe needs a shidduch. Do we really care? Are we modal isha? Are we really known with a vav or without a vav? We really care about those around us. We can't just wait for the knock on the door. They need help. Oh, sure. Most of us are ready to help when the knock comes on the door. But can we be like Naomi, who takes the initiative herself? Or are we more like Boaz, who waits for the case to come to his feet, come to his door, before he takes the actions of kindness? That's the challenge of Megillas Ruth, to be like Naomi, to be like Ruth, to take action with our own hands, to make the kindness happen, and not to be really like Boaz, or at least this permutation, this version of Boaz, passive, without initiative. That's not the way of ultimate kindness. Shavuos is coming. We're supposed to be working on our character. As we count the Omer, we count down to the receiving of the Torah. Ultimate value of the Torah, in many ways, is chesed and kindness. We need to be working on ourselves and asking ourselves, which version of Boaz are we most like? Thank you for joining us here for our discussion, Boaz, the Book of Ruth, as we prepare for Shavuot. We learned throughout this year, in memory of my father of blessed memory, Baruch Reb Chaim Shmuel, Arini Kaparat Mishkavo, may his memory be blessed. And I want to thank Jason Lefkowitz, Baruch Chaim, for making today's presentation possible. And thank you for joining us here at the Anshe Sfar Beth El Emet congregation here in Memphis, Tennessee, for our discussions. Join us for further discussions in the future, God willing. And feel free to look at our past archives for other discussions of Ruth, Shavuos in the weekly portion. Have a good week.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.